On today's episode of the Post Christian Podcast, I have with me Alan McWilliams. How you doing, Alan?
I'm very well, thank you, Eric. It's nice to meet with you and get a chance to chat.
Absolutely. So you are part of the Cairn movement. I have a friend from Scotland. I was talking with him, and he says you need to have Alan on your podcast. Talk about what you do and this movement of God called Cairn.
Yeah. So my background would be that I'm a Presbyterian minister. Been involved in doing that now for about 30 odd years. But the job that I was doing within the denomination was really around church planting. And so in 1996, we began a church in the West End of Glasgow. And then within a few years, we were beginning to kind of get people coming in and saying, hey, how do you plant a church in Scotland? You're planting, how do you do that? That doesn't make any, that we've not got any experience of that in our context because everywhere's got a church. That's the thing. That's what Christendom looks like. But now we're in this different space, and we began to kind of train people. So we're part of this sort of the Forge international kind of movement that trains people, and we began to kind of train people from about 2003 on. We're involved in training about 260 people over the last 20 odd years. They've gone on to plant about 150 churches. And the thing I always have to say to you guys in America is you have to take our numbers and you have to multiply them by 70 to get an equivalent number in the US. Okay. So just keep that in mind when we talk about numbers, because you're that many times bigger than Scotland. So we've been doing that, as I say, for about 20 years, and about 5 years ago, I came out of kind of church planting leadership to really kind of concentrate on really on developing a network of church planting practitioners, and actually we work with existing churches as well who want to get themselves more into a pattern of discipleship making that leads into the more missional space. So we talk about the mixed economy in our work. So we're working with new church planters and pioneers and mission project guys. And we're also working with existing church pastors who want to kind of see their churches transformed. So that's essentially what's at the core of what we do within Cairn. Our big goal is to see a vibrant church in every community and network in Scotland, and these are the two places that we work.
It's beautiful. I love hearing the vision behind it and the history behind it. CAIRN movement.com. I noticed you have the question, are you starting something new? Are you growing something established? I love that you're taking what God has been doing in this church planting movement, but you're also helping those who have already got something going. I would love to just hear, maybe as a word of encouragement, what are some of the ways you're seeing God at work now through some of the church plants there
Yeah,
and abroad? Yeah.
yeah. So in the last year or so, we've been working with 10 new church plants that have come off the back of our. We have a kind of a pipeline of church planters coming through, people beginning to kind of get excited, get trained, and then start. And we support them all the way through the first 3 to 5 years. And last year, just to give you an example, we had 10 new church plants that are going to get planted. So just a random selection would be we have somebody working in Shetland Islands, which actually is a set of islands that are nearer Norway than they are Scotland, but
Huh.
that's where they are, part of the UK. They're right in the North Sea, and tiny little place, mostly associated with oil. So that's where all of the kind of the North Sea oil rigs and all the rest of it, kind of all the oil guys work in Shetland. Anyway, so this person was working in Shetland, and they recognised that there's a huge addiction group, people who were struggling with addictions, and they were moving into a recovery space. And so she's actually launched a recovery church,
Mhm.
predominantly working with people who are coming through the addiction process and coming out the other side and wanting to kind of find faith and build a community of faith. So that's our friend Michelle, who's up in Lerwick in Shetland Islands. We have somebody who's building, actually an American couple, lovely couple called Caleb and Summer Shockley. They are planting in Meadowbank in Edinburgh, in the capital city of Scotland, and they came across as missionaries, and we're looking for missionaries, by the way, to come and help us, come over and help us. And so they came and helped us by planting in Edinburgh. And they're planting quite I would sort of say is a real kind of local community thing. It's out of their house. It's built around a home. It's built in families and meals and so on. So that kind of model. We've got somebody who's working in Perthshire, and they're running an organisation called In Together. And the In Together is basically kind of reaching out to families affected by kids who have autism. So
Mm,
that whole kind of community around the autistic sort of support and schools and kids and families and so on.
mm,
And they're reaching into that community and building church for those folks. That's based in Perth. And then in the very far west, the most extreme west on the mainland in Scotland is a place, wait for this, you're going to love this. It's called Uchter, Ardor. Okay, it's called Uchter Ardor, which is almost impossible for you guys to kind of
I
imagine. But
can't
anyway,
imagine how to spell it. Yeah.
oh, don't even ask. But it's like put it this way: there are more sheep than people in that community. So it's a really remote, really rural community, and a lovely friend of mine called
Mm,
Howard, who planting just a local community church. All of the in our context, and again, this is probably why you're kind of interested. You know, in our context, a lot of the local kind of what we would describe as parish churches or local churches have closed. So
mm,
we're in a situation where the national church, the biggest church, is a denomination I've been part of all my life, the Church of Scotland. They are looking at the possibility of they had 10 years ago there were 1,800 parishes or churches, and by the time we get to the end of 2026, there will be 600.
wow.
They're expecting that by the time they get to 2029, they will have dropped that to 400.
Mm,
And statistically, they've done the guys who do kind of church research and attendance. What they're sort of saying is because of the age profile of the church and because of the decline of the church and because of the lack of leadership, statistically, they've actually said that there is a statistical end date for the denomination of 2036. So
wow.
within 12 years, we're talking about 12 years. This is now you got to understand. I don't know what would be the biggest denomination in America. I don't know what it would be. Would
I
it be
mean,
the
I would
Southern?
imagine Southern Baptist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're shrinking currently.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you can imagine someone who's sort of saying, okay, in 12 years' time, the Southern Baptists are going to be gone. You know, that's the
Mm,
equivalent for us in terms of the Church of Scotland. So we're in that kind of situation. So our guys are planting into spaces where, churches have disappeared, local kind of congregations have
mm,
stopped functioning, and they're now replacing, they're kind of stepping into spaces that have been created really as a result of these churches no longer functioning.
wow.
But they're now creating new patterns. So, recovery church, local community church, one around autism, one in the rural context, all over Scotland. These are just 4 of the 10 that we're working with from last year. And each year we're sort of seeing people coming through. So that, it's a real mixed bag. There's lots of things that are great. And there's obviously lots of things that are really quite painful in terms of the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Well, and I love the very specific calling of strategy, meeting real needs that out of that comes a local church.
Yeah.
Maybe give some encouragement. I mean, how do you keep at it knowing the biggest denomination is shrinking? You're in an environment where, it's not just these adults didn't grow up going to church, their parents didn't grow up going to church.
Church.
It's so difficult, and yet God is at work. Like, give us a little bit of encouragement for anyone who's out there who's a bit discouraged right now in their context.
Okay, so this is the simplest thing to say. Jesus is just the best news ever. Okay,
Mm,
there is no other place, no other person, no other way that you're going to find life in all its fullness. And the gospel is good news. It
mm,
continues to be good news. And so, that's if you're asking me why we do it, that's it. We're doing it
mm,
because we've discovered that we are loved by a God who just is so desperate to pour out his love into people's lives, and we're convinced by that ourselves, and that's
mm.
what actually. So that's if you like the personal, the biggest, the primary motivation is just, we do this because we want to kind of, as the sort of the missionaries used to sort of say, we want Jesus to receive the full reward for his sufferings. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of that's where we would start. But here's the good news. The good news is people are open to the gospel. The issue
Mm,
is not the gospel. The issue is not the good news. It's not about connection with Jesus. What we're finding in our post-Christian context is that actually that there are more and more people who are open to the good news and who are open to spirituality. Now that's a different
Mhm.
thing, but it's related. So in 2021, the British broadcast company, the BBC, big reputable broadcaster in the UK, did a survey, and they asked the question: how many people in particular age brackets are involved now in praying at least once a month and going to church at least once a month? And the stats were absolutely amazing. They blew everyone away because basically what they sort of said is they gave two stats. One was around the kind of the 55 and up, and the answer to that was that prayer 16%
Mm,
once a month, 55 and up,
mm,
worship experience 14% once a month. Okay.
mm.
They then looked at the 18 to 35-year-old age group. And you want to have a guess? It's higher. You want to guess? No. So
Yeah,
basically,
50. Yeah.
50. That's exactly the number. So the
Wow.
49 and 51. So basically, in terms of prayer, 51%. In terms of worship experience, once a month, 49% of 18 to 35-year-old of the whole population. This is not church goers. Now, remember that at the moment, the church attendance survey of 2016 said that in Scotland, 8% of our population were attending worship.
Wow.
And so we are seeing what I would describe. I mean, you're talking about the kind of post-Christendom stuff. I think we're now pre-Christendom for that generation because
I love it.
they've the kind of post-Christendom thing assumes that you've actually experienced Christendom and that you've
Point.
almost gone beyond it.
Yeah.
These guys, they never experienced it.
Yeah.
They are now genuinely, the kind of third, sometimes the fourth generation away from people who have been involved in faith. And so, they are now open in a way that actually is just huge.
Mm.
You're a bit of a funny sort of way of thinking about it, but I watched I get taken to the Barbie movie, okay, by my wife. I have to say, I didn't want to go, but she said, "Come on, we're going." So I went to the Barbie movie. And at the end of it, I was so excited, and not because I thought the film was great, but because I looked at them and I said, that film speaks to this generation's need for existential identity,
Mm.
purpose. What so it's all about who am I? What does
Mhm.
it mean to be human? How do I find love? How do I relate to other people? What am I here for? Is there not more than this kind of stuff? So that deep
Mhm.
existential question is actually, I mean, it's a silly example, but it is actually there, and you see it, and we're seeing it increasingly in the kind of the Gen Xers and the guys that are coming up. They are.
Yeah.
I talked to somebody. We do this church planting stuff, the training thing that we do, and we had a guy on, the guy called James, and he's 22, and we had a whole bunch of people who were kind of like, he was Gen Z, and then we had the millennials and kind of the guys, the Xers, Gen Xers, and so on. And the ones who are kind of Gen X, just Gen X, but Gen X,
Mhm.
where we had the experience where actually our friends and our school, it was a really negative place. Christianity was very much despised and nobody wanted it. And, we don't want any of that. And James was sort of saying when he went through school, he was very clear about his faith, but he sort of said, it was totally cool. Everyone was fine with it. And they were kind of like, you do you, that's fine. And they had that kind of attitude. But then often he sort of said, I would talk about prayer and they would want to know. They would want to be prayed for. They were up for that. They were open for
Wow.
that. So there is so in terms of kind of the culture shift, and I would guess this must be true in America too. The Gen Xers and the kind of younger generation are definitely in a different place
Mhm.
than the guys that are kind of the millennials even, or for that matter, the kind of Gen
Yeah,
X and B. So I really do think there's an encouragement. The issue is not the gospel.
that's
Okay,
right.
Jesus is still good news. The gospel works. The issue, and this is the hard thing, is often that we're not doing church in a way that attracts people and holds people and disciples people. That's
Yeah,
the challenge.
that's
How do we
right.
change that? But we can change that. That's the bit that we can change.
That's the bit we can change. That's right. Well, and Austin, we have about 10 to 12% that go to church. I would say some of them are more like used to and stopped. But we do have people from all over the world that are moving here as well. And you're right, Gen Z, as you'd say, Gen Z, there are stories and videos of, secular college campuses experiencing revival, not just the Asbury's of the world, which we pray for more of, but maybe talk for a little bit about what are some of the things that you think either the American church or the Church of Scotland, like what are some things that we can change, should change, that make us more accessible, or at least the gospel more accessible to those we're trying to reach?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I would sort of say that the temptation is to start at the programmatic level, and that's what I think most churches have done for a long time. So just add a more evangelistic program, add an alpha, or run a food bank, or do something for the kids, or do some, sports programs, or blah blah blah, all that stuff. And I think that that's where a lot of people have kind of tried, and that's where a lot of kind of pastors at the moment I think are really discouraged because they've tried all that stuff and it's not worked. And then what's happened is that people have sort of said, right, well, we're not going to do necessarily kind of the programs. We need to go deeper. So let's actually restructure ourselves. And so they've moved into things like microchurch, or they've gone into kind of different patterns of cell church, or different, they've tried different ways of organizing themselves. And again, that fundamentally hasn't really worked for a lot of the folks. And so what happens is you get a lot of kind of, we call it conference fatigue, or kind of
Mhm.
like Christian fatigue. Please don't make me go to another conference. Please don't make me read another book. And that's because everybody's had a go at these things and they've not worked. So again, a lot of the kind of missional thinkers are actually start saying you need to go in the deeper space, which is really what your podcast is about, which is actually about change the paradigm. We can no longer assume that actually that we can do attractional, come to us church. We need to kind of flick ourselves back out and do embedded incarnational kind of pattern mission. So we need to work out what does it look like to go out. And I think that is actually one of the key things that people can change. So I think it's a deep process, it's a longer process to think about that. But I think there's actually a kind of a more fundamental level than that, actually. I think that if you're kind of thinking about concentric circles of trying to do things, so there's the programs, there's a restructuring, there's this change of the paradigm. But I think at the core of it, actually, there's almost I think it's a spiritual activity that's required. And I would sort of put in the sort of central circle, I would sort of say that's actually about surrender.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that fundamentally what's going on is that God is recalibrating his church. I think
Mhm.
he wants his church back. I think
Yeah.
that a lot of what's going on, certainly in our situation, is that we've tried all of our stuff and we've tried to make it work. And we've thought that actually with a bit more information and a bit more effort and a bit more prayer and a bit more strategy, we can make this work. We've got that kind of attitude. And I think that there's almost a kind of a pattern of church life, which I kind of feel has that. It's almost kind of like it's man-made. It's driven by us.
Mhm.
It's our activity. But I feel that there's a deep thing that God's doing. He's actually sort of saying, "No, I actually want to be in charge. I want you to be. I want you to kind of move out of center stage. I want you to kind of be back in that space where actually, where I can be in charge." So I think that one of the biggest changes is that there's a need to actually kind of ask that deeper question, not just about the paradigm, not just the way we think,
Mhm.
and not just thinking about being missional. Because I think even missional thinking, church planting and starting new things, all that stuff, that can actually be the same thing in a
Mhm.
different guy. That can
Mhm.
still be our best efforts. And I
Mhm.
think there's a more fundamental kind of change that's required, which is actually this thing of surrender. We talked, we've talked about an image, which is really about kind of the choice that's in front of us as Christians, and we talk about this as the two pathways.
Mhm.
We can either have the known pathway or the unknown pathway. The known pathway is basically church as we have faith for it and as we are willing to work for it, where we're going to sort of see God do things, we're going to see some things happening, and that's going to be great and that's good. And actually, I can see that that would be something which, in some ways, we would be familiar with, and it would be something that we could kind of like, we could sort of say, right, we recognize this. But I wonder whether or not this sort of season is actually one of a recalibration around submission, which actually is an invitation from our Lord to walk in the unknown pathway. And I think
Mhm.
the unknown pathway is one of surrender. It's where actually we day by day say, I I choose not to try to make this thing happen. You know, I choose to trust you, God. I choose to surrender to you, God. And I want to posture myself in that place where actually, you know, whatever happens, it's got to be you, because I
Mm,
don't want. Because the thing is, I mean, we can make church, you know, happen. We can make Christianity happen. We can kind of push forward in mission. We can do all sorts of things. But I really think that, you know, that's a repetition of of the old pattern. Is there a deeper thing, as I say, that I think is maybe the Lord taking us into an unknown space, into a place of dependence and surrender?
mm.
Um, Now, what
That's
does that look
beautiful.
like? Well, it's a challenge though, because I know that because because what we're actually trained for as leaders is competence
Mm,
and follow through. You know,
mm,
we're going to do this, so we're going to get it done, we're going to keep going, we're not going to give in. All of these qualities are the ones that we have, and we encourage people to try and kind of, you know, don't be passive, be active, and so on. And actually, you know, and so what happens is that competent leaders who have gathered ability and competency and all the rest of it over many, many years, you know, to actually say to them, look, you know, the Lord is actually fundamentally asking you to let go and
mm.
trust and not just chase after your kind of latest best idea. That's hugely challenging because
Big
it's
deal.
so counter cultural to
Yeah.
everything that we've taught. I mean, we've been encouraged. I've been a pastor 31 years, and you know, I've been to every conference and every book, and I've done everything. You know, I've done every training organized thing that I can do, and because that's what I understood God was sort of saying. But I do wonder if there's a kind of, let's say, whether or not this is not just simply you know, oh, we're waiting for the next best thing to come, but actually at a more fundamental level that God's calling us deeper
Mm.
into a place of empathy.
So well said. That's beautiful. I really appreciate that. And you said even before we came on the air, there's a way for people to come and catch a vision of ministry in Scotland. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we're in Cairn Movements. We're really kind of keen to give people the opportunity just to come and to look and to see and to learn just what this context is like, where we're kind of sort of seeing the kind of rapid decline of the church and the re-establishment of the church through new church plants, and also through a number of existing churches really kind of becoming revitalized in terms of
Mm.
mission and so on. So next year, 2025. We think probably just after the summer and the fall of next year, there'll be a vision trip, and we're looking for folks who are interested in wanting to kind of come and be part of that. If you'd like to be part of it, we'd love to hear from you. Just go on our website, cairnmovement.com, contact us, and say, hey, I'd love to kind of come as part of your vision trip for next year, and we'll get back in touch with you.
If you've never been to Scotland, just going to that beautiful place, I highly recommend it. But to see God at work with Alan, just what a treat. Thanks for the invitation, Alan. Keep up your great work and God bless.
Thank you, and lovely to see you.